Then the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. Coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big fritters go, it was bigger than most, with the crew and good captain well seasoned, including some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. And later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? The wind and the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. Every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. Dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. Suppertime came, the old cook came on deck saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed ya." At 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and a good ship and crew was in peril. Later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Lake Huron rolls and Superior sings in the rooms of her ice-water mansion. While Michigan steams like a young man's dream, the islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. The iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November, remember. In a musty old hull in Detroit they prayed, in a maritime sailors' cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Kitchigoo. Superior, they say, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early.
So this year happened to be an interesting year up at Whitefish Point, where we have the memorial every year. The gentleman that represents Gordon Lightfoot, that plays his music every year at the museum on November 10th, told us a story again about how the song was written and how it's gone through some revisions over time because of some of the words in the song. She sang the original version of it, and things like the musty old hall was changed and things like that. But Gordon wrote the song from a Newsweek magazine article. That's where he got most of the words, if not all of them. And the music was just something they were working on. His album at the time was almost finished, and this song, of course, was 6 minutes plus when it first went out. And you know, back in those days, on radio, they didn't want anything over 2.5 minutes. So he sort of forced it, and they got that song played, and of course it became one of the top songs of that time, and that made that album turn gold. So it only made it to number 2 on the charts. I forget the song that was number 1. Oh, it's something you all would remember, but it does. I'm sorry?
Was it 1975?
The song in the album came out in '76.
Yeah, okay.
So after, I think it was released in March of '76. And it was mostly some of his greatest hits on that particular album.
Yeah, he was good.
One of them was this particular song. So just a little back history on the song. It was pretty cool, and Gordon always wanted to the families, he wanted to be correct, and he didn't want to insult anybody. So he, over the years, did change the words a little bit. I know the musty old hall was one, and I think the hatch cover one, part of the song, the hatch covers caved in, and at that point, when he wrote the song, obviously that's what everyone assumed, but they don't believe that that's what happened based on some of the evidence that they have. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to sort of tailor this to this group, because only an hour. I can't get into everything, but of course I'll answer questions when I'm done. I put this, the original first time I ever gave a talk was actually at the museum up in Whitefish Point, where I was asked to speak to the families, and I gave a 10-minute, real brief speech on what it was like to go out that night and to search. But then I came home, obviously. I grew up in Solon. I lived in Twinsburg for 40 plus years until recently we sold our house here in Twinsburg, and I built a house down in Uniontown. So first talk I gave in the area was at Solon, so forgive me for putting Solon up. I know it's Twinsburg. So anyway, go ahead, dear. Next one. So the Fitzgerald, when they have the memorial service every year, the families come up there. It's a way for them to get peace. No one's allowed to die on the wreck anymore. It's considered to be a memorial without permission from the Canadian government and the families of all the sailors that lost their lives. Go ahead, dear. My wife is my assistant here, so. All the names of all the sailors that lost their lives, 29. So every year we ring the bell 29 times, plus one extra for all mariners who've lost their lives. There've been a lot of Great Lakes shipwrecks. There's over 7,000 that they know of, and there's probably a few more that they don't know about on the Great Lakes. I think Lake Superior has over 350 to 400 alone, so being the deepest and the coldest lake. And just to give you an idea what the ceremony's like, they have an opening prayer. It goes through, and they have the director of the museum will give us a short talk. And this is the year that I gave my talk up there, a reflection, along with a Coast Guard buddy of mine that was on the ship with me. They do the last call, which is when they announce all the names, ring the bell for everybody that's lost their lives. We end up with a Mike Forens, who's the Whisperers of the North, is the group that was given the blessing by Gordon Lightfoot to do the performance of the song every year. And they end up then again with another invocation from a local preacher of some type. So that's what they do every year. So you might as well go to the next one. I have a lot of slides here.
Sorry.
That's from the memorial marking shipwreck. Next one. So the Edmund Fitzgerald was launched 1958, I believe. It was the longest ship on the Great Lakes at that time. Since then, they're 1,000-footers. She was 729 feet. Had 29 men on her, which to me has always been a coincidence. 729 and 29. She sank in 590 feet of water, so she could have stood on end and been sticking out of the water. So go ahead to the next one. Steam in the Great Lakes. This is taken from my ship. We used to steam, and in fact, that back then in the early 70s, when the Great Lakes were freezing over a lot, we would go out, break ice to free up the ships. That is the Edmund Fitzgerald. Just happened to be, I caught a glimpse of her and got a picture off the bow. So we would break ice, and it would allow them to go ship from the taconite mines up north in Minnesota, Bemidji, places like that, all the way down to the lower Great Lakes where they made the steel. They always say in the song that they were on their way to Cleveland. They were really on their way to Toledo to drop off a load there. And then they were going to make a way back up again and do one more trip for sure that year. But obviously they didn't make it. So I actually bought a postcard, and after she had sunk, they put this stamp on it saying that they had, when they sold it because she had sank. So I bought it, kept for my collection, and have it in my book of stuff. So next, just pictures of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Most of these are available online if you have, if you ever Google it. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum usually broadcasts that memorial every year on the night of. They do a live stream. This year's live stream wasn't all that great. The gentleman that did it was getting interference from the orchestra that was playing, and so it cuts out from time to time, but you still find it online if you wanted to see what it really is like. So next one. Going to the Sioux Locks, steaming up and down. Pretty nice. The boat, the captain, the first mate stay up front. The rest of the crew is in the stern. The galleys in the stern. They actually have on the Fitzgerald had an extra couple sets of quarters. If you had enough money, you could sail the Great Lakes on board one of the ships. Not quite like a cruise, but they do feed you really well, and you get to see some things you never see before. So, and another picture is this a very good photo that's on display in a lot of different places. I believe that might be the Detroit River. So, there are so many books out. I brought only a handful of books I have. I have some pictures here, newspaper articles from when she sank. I even have an official copy of the, don't tell nobody, the Marine Casualty Report from the U.S. Coast Guard. I guess you could say I probably light-fingered it, but it was available for people to read, and because I was so involved in it, yeah, I kind of picked it up. So. They do have one at the museum on display, and I have another one. So, of course, the U.S. Coast Guard was very involved in all this. The first calls came in to Sault Ste. Marie, to a person that I knew at the time on the radio, that the Anderson was the motor vessel Anderson had lost contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald. She disappeared off the radar, and the last conversation they had was that she was holding her own and taking out a little bit of water. So, what?
That's from the Woodbrush.
Oh, and so this flag, and I have a pennant somewhere here, laying there. That was actually flying on my ship the day that we went out for the rescue. So. So let me get into the wheres and the whys. We had just come into home port in Duluth after running our fall buoy run. Buoys on the Great Lakes are very important. They have the lights, they have the bells, they have all the information for the ships to know where the shallows are and where the reefs are and things like that. And Lake Superior has a lot of islands, a lot of shallows, so we put out buoys in the spring and pull them back in the winter because the ice usually is too thick up there and will destroy them, so we pull them out. Ships still operate, sometimes late into the year. They have to stay into the main channels, because they wouldn't know where the shallows are without those buoys. So we came in and we started to break down a couple of our engines, one of the generators and things like that, to get ready for the ice breaking season. So what we were considered to be in Charlie status. Charlie status is out of service until we can get the engines back. Well, that night was on November 10th, happened to be a Monday night football game, so half the crew went home for Liberty, and the other half stayed on board doing the normal shipboard stuff. Then as we were getting ready to watch Monday night football, across the local screens came the crew of the Woodrush, please report back to your ship. And that's how we got a notification. They also did the phone thing. Back then, everybody had landlines, no cell phones, obviously. And we got a phone call too to say get back to the ship as quickly as possible. So from that point, that would have been about 7:30, somewhere in there, because the Fitzgerald disappeared around 7:10, so it had been about 7:30. Most of us reported back to the ship. Well, since we just came in, we didn't have provisions on board, things like that. So in those days, you just didn't run down the street to get, stores didn't stay open late. There was no Sunday shopping, things like that. So I had to beg, borrow, and steal everything I could from the main base that was there. I was the supply clerk, like the Radar O'Reilly of the ship, and so I went into the cook's galley and took just about everything I could get my hands onto. Of course, without him knowing. I'm sure he wasn't happy the next morning, but I'm sure he forgave us. So we got everything on board we could, tried to load up as much fuel as we possibly could, and by midnight we were underway. So this would have been 4 or 5 hours after the first call came in that we didn't know where she was. In the meantime, the motor vessel Anderson, was asked by the U.S. Coast Guard if she could turn about. And she was real reluctant, because at that point it was 30-foot seas plus, and those ships actually kind of rotate in the water, But depending on how long they are, they look like a snake going through the water in really rough seas. She did turn around. There was one other vessel that turned around. They took a beating damage-wise, but they both survived, and we're looking and searching for hopefully any survivors. So we got underway about midnight, a little bit after the CO. We weren't all there. Part of our crew did not make it in time back to the ship. Some people actually went home to visit, and sometimes it was farther away than you were supposed to go. But we were in Charlie status, so nobody really thought about it. So we get underway, get out of the harbor. Well, we're rolling already. I mean, we were rocking and rolling at the. This is a picture of, but I'm sorry, I'm not even paying attention, and I'm talking already. This is my boot camp photo, just to show you. I joined in '72. I was only 17 years old. I wanted to see the world and save people's lives. So Popeye was one of the original coasties. I don't know if anybody knows that. Here he is on shore guarding the lifeboat and olive oils there. Just a little levity. Of course, every time you're in the service, families get the chance to put stuff in the paper so they can be proud of their kids. And this was in the Cleveland, or the local paper, maybe I think Solon, and maybe the Cleveland Plain Dealer. So yeah, that might have been the. Go ahead, dude. You can go by. This is some of the earlier. I was on a river tender before I got shipped up to Duluth, Minnesota. In the river tender, we took care of buoys. Every time there was a storm, the buoys would all get washed down, and we'd have to bring them all back. So I was getting kind of used to this, putting things in and taking things out. So I was on board the Woodrush. That's the 180-foot buoy tender. She's a round bottom buoy tender, so when she got rocking and rolling, she was moving pretty good. We broke ice in the winter. She was launched in 1944 near the end of World War II, and by the time I got on her, which would have been 1973, she's over 30 years old and showing her age already. So she still exists, only she's not in the U.S. Coast Guard anymore. She's in one of the African nations Coast Guard, and I don't even remember which country it is, but she still exists. And she doesn't look anything like that anymore, unfortunately. You can go ahead, dear. Sorry. Great Lake Superior on a beautiful sunset night. Calm waters, nothing, no problems, not a normal night. Great Lakes ships sailing up and down. And that's just a normal day when you get 6-footers. That's the lighthouse that's just out of I believe it's Two Harbors, and Split Rock Lighthouse. It's beautiful up there. You'll get a chance to go up the north coast along Lake Superior. It's absolutely gorgeous. So, just to give you an idea, so this is the lift bridge I just mentioned that we were going out. This happens to be a cold front coming in. That's just clouds. Oh. No waves. But you can't see anything on the Great Lake, on that Great Lake. It's just without radar, you'd be at a loss. So we actually made it out that gate, that bridge, and on Lake Superior, rocking and rolling already, and the captain had already ordered everything locked down. And then at that point, that's when he told us where we were going. Up to that point, we had no idea why we were getting underway, because they hadn't made the announcement on live TV. It's not like it is today, where you 5 minutes after something happens, you can hear about it. It hadn't been broadcasted yet, so and we were told where we were going and why we were going there. Well, this vessel only does about 15 knots, the one I'm talking about. It's 300 miles to Sault Ste. Marie. We knew it was going to take us at least 20 plus hours to get where we were going, and that was with all the rocking and rolling. So, home port for us on a normal day, and just some other rescues that they were performing. Just to give you an idea, helicopters back in the day would not have been able to fly in that weather. Go ahead, next one. And this is our boat going through a normal day on Lake Superior, just taking waves. So here's the idea that I wanted to show, that this boat is taking the waves on a pretty good storm on Lake Superior, and you can see how it's breaking over. I know it's not great clarity here, but it's the best I can do. So, and then the harbor going out, just a normal day, and then the next one is. This was just taken a couple of weeks ago. As you can see, that's like, 10 feet over the break wall there? And that's just waves coming in. That's not even a storm. So, next. Us underway on Lake Superior. Just another lighthouse and another lighthouse. I actually throw a whole bunch in. Go ahead. This is the Great Lake Shipwreck Museum up on Whitefish Point. It's just awesome site up there, and they have a lot of information about all the Great Lakes and shipwrecks. They had some of the things on the Bradley, which sank in the 60s, and There was a ship in the 50s that sank that they have information and artifacts from. So the Fresnel light that they have that uses shine above in this lighthouse. And then one of the islands on Lake Superior that we used to change crews out, even in the wintertime. Crews would live on the islands a month on, a month off by themselves, and then we would go out and ferry crews and food and supplies out to them. So just to give you an idea, the islands on Lake Superior, like Lake Erie, all had lighthouses and all had crews on them. So to keep the sailors from running aground. Just here we are ferrying a crew in a lifeboat through all that ice, getting the food and supplies to the island, and we would also fuel them at the same time. So, and just a shoreline along Lake Superior, Great Lakes shipwreck. Steamer going downbound. Our ship sitting in ice, probably wintertime. In our ship back when I was on it. So breaking ice. Power of Lake Superior. Here, this was the mesquite that took the place of the Woodrush after I left. And the ensign on board, who was the officer of the deck that night, they were getting a buoy off of one of the reefs, and unfortunately he ran aground, and they had to abandon ship. That ship is now resting on the bottom of Lake Superior. So even when you know where everything is and you're really good at what you do, if you make a mistake, it can be deadly. And nobody lost their lives, but Coast Guard lost valuable ships. So, and she had stayed there all winter, and she, come spring, she was so full of holes from all the moving around with the ice and everything that they just let her sink. They pulled her off and moved her to deeper water, and that's our patch from we used to wear on our work uniforms. Next, the captain of my boat, Jimmy Hobaugh, good old Salt. He was a Mustang, and those that remember service. So he started out as a BM1, and he went to officer candidate school and became a Mustang. He was about 38 years old, and I never got the chance to ask him about the going out that night. I mean, we talked, but I never got to ask him if he was how he felt about. And from his daughter, that I meet with once a year, she said, yeah, he was scared, you know what, and he just didn't want you guys to know about it. So, and just some of the crew, you can keep going. So okay, so that is me on.
You look like you're 12.
Yeah, I'm about 12. Bunch of motley crew. We used to actually swim in Lake Superior, yeah, but the water never got about 50 degrees. So this guy is kind of crazy, and I think we threw him overboard, and he's just trying to climb back up again, and he's so cold. We usually dress for the occasion, and it's mostly cold up there. So breaking ice again, another deckhand, another ship we're posing in front of as we're breaking ice, and the crazy stuff that we used to do. So we did make our way across Lake Superior that night. I usually was allowed to go up on the bridge when there wasn't a lot happening, and I wanted to go up on the bridge to see what it was like that night. So I went up the ladder to the bridge. It was really moving up quite a bit. I'm not ashamed to say a lot of people were sick. So we were talking 30, 35, 40-foot waves. And most of the guys, we slept in these hammocks, and in order to keep yourself from rolling out of the hammock, you had to tie yourself in. And I did that night. But just to get back to where I was, I went up on the bridge and asked permission, because you always had to ask permission to come on the bridge. The captain said no, and sent me back down below, because he didn't want people to know how bad it was. Only the guy on the bridge and the helmsman, who was working his butt off, I have to say, to keep us on the straight and narrow, were having issues. All I saw was a wall of water when I got to the top of the bridge. So, and I didn't say a word when I went down below because you don't want to really spread stuff like that. So it was pretty bad. So go ahead. We had a mascot on board. You get covered with ice. Our mascot was a Labrador, and he was a trooper. So
Did you take him out that night?
he was out with us. Yeah.
Wow.
Guys posting, and just a bunch of pictures just to show you how young we were. We were just mostly in our early 20s at that time. So
How large was your ship?
180 feet. So not very big. Go ahead. And the dog helped out on the radio every now and then. So if we ever got stuck in the ice, we would have to use the weights, the concrete weights that we use for buoys to help free us. We'd rock ourselves back and forth. So, and then just setting buoys. Another picture of Edmund Fitzgerald. I think the next one. Okay, so that night, you had to appreciate this. There's two storms that came together over Lake Superior, and the low pressure from the storms was like low 800s. I can't even see anymore. 8.48, I can see 9. So anyone who knows anything about weather, the lower the pressure, the tighter the bands, the more the storm has the energy to build up the waves and the wind and all that other stuff. So they all merged over Lake Superior and came right over the area. So the Edmund Fitzgerald was in the wrong place at the wrong time at that particular moment. For the Anderson to survive the 30-foot plus waves and the Edmund not, I mean, everybody takes on water when you're sailing in weather like that. It certainly makes you think about how you're here one minute and gone the next. So one of the worst storms you'll ever get, and they say the only other storm that could compare, there was a 1916 storm in which I think like 10 ships sank on the Great Lakes in that storm. And this one only took one ship. So information about some of the shipwrecks, they're saying over 7,000. And Bruce, I've heard Bruce from the museum say it could be up to 10,000. So next. The way the Fitzgerald lays on the bottom. So when we finally get on site, after all that, in fact, we took a couple of ways we didn't think we'd come back from. The ship was allowed to go 38 degrees in either direction. And if you went past that 38 degrees, which I was told by somebody that was on the bridge, we did, you're not supposed to come back. The boat just keeps going. And this boat wasn't one that was self-righting, so we would have been right there with them. So yeah, after the fact, we all kind of like went to church and prayed because that's about that's the only thing you could have done. So ship lays in two pieces, and I know people will have questions about this, but so what sank her? To be honest with you, there were 3 and possibly 4 explanations, but shoals, if she'd hit bottom on the shoals, during a couple of the big waves, you know, the 30-foot waves, if the shoals are only 20 feet in the 30-foot wave, bottoming of the ship is really a possibility. But when they investigated the shoal, they found no evidence that any ship had bottomed out recently. So that probably was not the way. They wondered if she had took a wave and forced her down to the bottom so that the bow hit the bottom and the stern came out of the water, and that's a possibility because she would have twisted apart and would have caused the shipwreck. They based it on the metallurgy. They believe that a big wave did hit her. She took on a lot of water and it forced her to the bottom, and they think that's what caused the demise. So. It's just more information. Go next year. She was 729 feet long. She had a beam of 23 feet, 17 miles more, and she'd have been fine. So once you're inside Whitefish Bay, you can go around the corner and you'd be able to at that point anchor and wait it out, but she didn't quite make it, so that's
How far was she away?
about 17 miles. Next. Next.
How does that equate to travel time?
I'm sorry?
How does that mileage equate to travel time?
So it would have probably still been an hour and a half to 2 hours because of the way the waves were hitting them. You go 2 feet forward and a foot and a half back, you know, so it was that kind of thing because the waves are coming from all different directions and pushing and pulling, and so next. That there's a picture hanging in the museum that someone did in memorial of the ship. Next. And then all the information from all the newspapers. I have a couple from the Cleveland Plain Dealer here. Many books on it, and I probably have I cornered the market in shipwreck books, but I wanted to read everything I could. We searched for a good week for any sign of life, which we kind of knew at that point, being the water being so cold and the storm being so hellacious that we probably wouldn't find anybody. And the story of the Lake Superior never gives up her dead. It's so cold that even with a life jacket on, the possibility of you getting to the surface are very slim. So, and staying on the surface. Today things are so different because of the Fitzgerald. The Great Lakes now have the lifeboats that allow the people to survive. They have the suits that allow them to stay in the water for a period of time, like they do. If you've ever watched the crab shows on the Discovery Channel, those guys have those suits. Even then, they don't estimate that they'll live more than a couple hours in the water with those suits on. So anytime we went off board and had to do anything in the lifeboat that we had, we all wore wetsuits. We did a couple of scenarios where we had to go around and fetch a man overboard. And my dad used to tell me to never volunteer for anything. Well, I volunteered that day to be the man overboard, and they put a wetsuit on me, and I got in the water, and they came around, man overboard drill, and in less than 15 minutes they had me back on board. I couldn't feel anything anymore. I was so cold. And that was on a normal fall day, so I can't imagine what it would have been like. So the recovery of the crew was unlikely. There was an unauthorized dive at one point where they photographed and saw a deceased member of the crew on the bottom. That was never really published. It has been out there, so people always ask that question. And what they did was, when they went down for the bell, to recover the bell as a memorial, they actually put the body back inside the ship because it's supposed to be a memorial for them, and they didn't want the families didn't want to know whose body it was, and they left him at peace down there. So, lifeboat, one of the lifeboats from the Fitzgerald that we picked up, they were ripped away from the ship, so it was so violent they never even had a chance to launch. And they're full of holes, and they're on display. There's two of them, and one's at the museum, and one's at there's a museum ship right in Sault Ste. Marie that you can go see these artifacts. So yeah.
Yeah, I might have missed this part, but why was she even sent out in that bad weather?
So,
obviously, they knew that a storm was brewing.
Yeah, they knew a storm. They thought they could make Whitefish Bay before the storm actually hit, but it was one of those freak ones that just got really strong really fast, and she was already out.
Okay.
Back in those days, they were subject to the corporation. The corporation said, we need to get so much out, and if they thought they had an opportunity to get safe into a harbor area. So if she'd have made Sault Ste. Marie, she'd have been able to get into Lake Huron and not have a problem. But because of the heavy waves and storm, she just didn't make it. So
Were there any lawsuits filed after this?
That one I don't know.
Okay.
I have talked to the families many times, but I don't know if that was,
Okay.
if there were any.
Was she current on all her certifications?
Yes,
And,
yeah. She was inspected in the spring. They're required to get inspected once a year by the Coast Guard. Typically, these vessels, they had those hatch dogs that they had to be cranked down by hand. And now they have automatic doggers that can do that. But every now and then, they might get a little lazy to get underway as quickly as possible and then dog them down while they're in the. But that night, things were rolling pretty good. I'm sure they didn't have a chance to, if they went underway without them. And I'm not saying they did, but they didn't get dogged down. So I'm just saying that that could be something that happened. Because for whatever reason, she was taken on water. But you know, they have those air vents that come above, and those were ripped off. Some of the fencing was ripped off the deck. So it's possible some of the waves got in through those water air vents that go down to the ship's boilers and the ship's engines. So it's possible that's why.
Where is the bell? that they-
So the bell is in the museum now, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum, which is at north of Brimley in the UP. So if you ever have a chance to go up to the UP, Upper Michigan there.
I read that was in Detroit.
So in Detroit they have an anchor.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so and they may have another bell there in Detroit. I don't know if they had one made for. They had one made for the ship to be lowered down while they raised up the other one. So there's a plaque on the ship and a replacement bell, and then they brought the real bell up. So is searching for survivors for a week. Then we went into port, and the Navy brought us a side-scanning sonar. The side-scanning sonar would be dragged behind our ship because we didn't know the exact location of where the Fitzgerald had sank. So we dragged that for another couple of weeks, and we were able to pinpoint where exactly the wreck lied and the exact location. And then from that point on, the Coast Guard had already started their investigation and using all this information. They ordered up the Navy's, back then they had an underwater sled called the Curve 3, and the Curve 3 would be lowered down to the bottom, and it would allow them to take videos and pictures and try to determine what happened, why did it happen. So that was in May of '76. I was on board. This is the Curve 3 off our deck. And then she was lowered, and they took hundreds of hours of video and still photography of just about every inch of that ship was and how she laid on the bottom. And and this is what they came up with, the artist sketch of what the ship looked like. Now I do have some pictures of her. The taconite that she was carrying, this was accidentally brought up on the skids from the Curve 3. It got stuck in the skids as they were lowering and moving around. It's kind of interesting. So we were the platform. We lowered anchors, 3 anchors, and we were able to move ourselves over the wreck to help move the Curve 3 around to see what we could take pictures of. So
How deep is the lake where she rests?
So she's about 530 feet deep. Real close to 529, which is another coincidence to me. So, but next picture.
Oh, okay.
So here's a picture of what damage that was done. This probably, like that's over the bridge. That was probably done by wave action only, and not by sinking. So it was battered in. All the windows were blown out. You can see the railing still there, like as if it had never been touched. So, next picture. This one, I can't even tell, it's so small. Can you blow it up a little bit? Oh, they're taking pictures of the bridge, I'm sorry, at a different angle from the propeller. The stern obviously is upside down. Majority of the crew was probably in the stern because of the weather. Now the bottom of these boats they have tunnels running up and down on both sides of the ship. It allows the crew to get back and forth without having to go on deck. So in a storm like this, they probably were down moving around the ship, but not on deck at the time. Pictures identified the Fitzgerald. It's the name of the ship, and the portholes were all blown out. That's just a good indication of how violent it was. And this is when they did the bell recovery. This would have been 95. And they had the first tolling of the bell when they brought her back to the shore. So I think that was done in July. And it just so happens, as Bruce told the story, that when they recovered this and brought her in and they had the ceremony there at Whitefish Point, the freak storm came up and blew the tents. Oh, I mean, this is supposed to be a celebration of the crew and everything, and the freak storm tore the tents, and they had to wait for the storm to subside before they decided to ring the bell. So this is just the Shipwreck Museum, give you an idea what it looks like on a normal day up there. And of course the Mackinac Bridge, in order to get up there, it's the only way up, is you got to go across that bridge. So yeah, unless you want to take the boat. And then a picture of the bell that we ring every year. A young man and his father. This was a flag that the Edmund Fitzgerald would have been flying. Apparently it was given to them as a gift from somebody that was on board ship. So I either had family or they donated it to the museum to be put on display. So they were posing for that. Some of the earlier dive suits that they would have used on Gray Lake shipwrecks. This is not the suit they used for the going down on the Fitzgerald. The actual dive suit, I think I have it in one of these pictures. More lights, keep going. No, we don't want the video. So this dive suit was donated by the diver that actually brought the bell up. He just passed away a year ago. I had the opportunity to meet him. He did a lot of diving on the Gray Lakes and looking for shipwrecks. He just passed away. He was in his mid-70s. He's the only one that physically, well, besides the couple of other gentlemen that went down illegally, and those gentlemen only spent 5 minutes on the bottom because that's all they could afford to at that depth. So, and here's just some of the family. This is my Coast Guard buddy, the captain's daughter, and family members of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Keep going, dear. Tony and I are posing. A young man drew this picture for me, and I actually have it on display over here somewhere. Yeah, one of the students. So as I gave a talk, and they drew the picture for me, and just a close-up of the bell. This is the anchor that they have in Detroit. The anchor was recovered, and they at the time didn't know it was the Edmund Fitzgerald anchor. She lost it by accident on the Detroit River, and they just discovered it. So, yes, go ahead.
What did you have on board ship? Iron ore?
Iron ore, the taconite pellets.
Okay.
The one I showed you in that one picture, the little round pellets is what they were carrying. That's how they shipped the ore.
The Navy Reserve downtown, and they had guys that went up there, and they said that the watertight integrity on the hatches was no good.
Well, that's what they
the water
said.
came in and
Now, in some of the pictures, and I don't have the pictures, you can see some online that shows some of the hatch cover dogs that they used to use. They weren't ripped away. So if you would have thought, well, some of them were, but some of them weren't. So if they would have all been undone, then that would have been one thing. If they wouldn't have all shown damage, then you would have known that they weren't dug down. But I'm sure that as she sank, all the cargo, which there's no division in the holds. It's all one giant hold, and they load it individually, but there's no way to stop the ship. So if she sank real fast, all that cargo went to the front and pushed. So 26,000 tons of taconite. So yes.
What do you mean by dogging?
So dogging is when they actually crank down on the hatch covers to lock to seal them so the water doesn't get in. So that's what I mean by dogging. It's just a term that they use in them as sailors. So yes.
Have they built ships differently now for safety for
Ships are built, now they're built in sections and welded together. So I don't know if they're built better or worse than they were. They're built a lot faster now because they can make a section welded together. And the Fitzgerald, I don't believe was ever lengthened. I think she was 729 feet at when she was launched. So
Yeah, so back to watertight integrity.
yes,
Was there no watertight integrity between the hatches?
the hatch was your protection.
Okay, so there was watertight integrity
Yes.
within each hatch.
So each
you could
hatch
have
had a
hatch
big
flood.
rubber seal on it, and then these dogs, as you would tighten them down, would keep, you know, like a car would have on a seal. You just dog them down and
Right, from season, but what I'm thinking about with all that flexing, one crack,
oh yeah,
okay,
it could happen.
in one hatch, okay, below the water
Right.
line, is that gonna flood that hatch, or is it gonna flood all hatches?
All hatches back in that day.
That's probably,
So they may be different now. I haven't sailed in, you know, I'm retired now since 2002, so it's been a while, but and the ships keep getting longer, so I don't know what they're like now. So.
yeah, so if there's no watertight integrity between all
Yeah,
those
no,
hatches,
there's not.
one crack would,
Yeah, but they do have bilge pumps down below that are allowed, you know, that they can pump the water overboard to get it out, but his pumps weren't able to keep up with the water. It could have been anything from a crack in the hull, it could have been just those air vents busting off that allowed enough water to get down there. You think about 30-foot seas, and this thing is 23 feet deep anyway. I mean, the depth of the ship in the water, so that means all this waves were cresting over the boat all the time. So a lot of water could have got in her that way too. So
she had ballast with all that.
that
She was-
weighed
she
her way
was-
down, yeah.
low as
So low in the water. So no, the model in the museum that they have on display, that was all handmade. Any more, or am I? Just some of the stuff we recovered that's in the museum. Looks like one of the safety tarps from one of the lifeboats there, and then life jackets. So they had the old style life jackets with the cork from '58. They hadn't been replaced. She did pass inspection, so I guess they were fine. Today they wear different types of life jackets. People wear much more buoyancy now. So one of the life preservers. Coast Guard report. So that report I have over here if anybody wants to thumb through it. And some of the others. So those have been oars from the ship. And information about the last voyage. A couple things that we recovered in the water that was kind of interesting. They have a sounding board. I don't know if that's the next slide or not. This sounding board, but it's broken in half. So sounding boards are used when you're in shallow water and they're doing the depth by hand. Much like they would do on the river. They would do on most of the river areas, not on when you were sailing on Lake Superior, but in like one of the rivers like the St. Mary's or the Detroit or something like that. So, a lighthouse at the Shipwreck Museum and memorial for, this was during COVID this was taken, so. And video of the service and the gentleman that's singing the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So. Go ahead, dear. Any more?
I think that's it.
Okay. I don't even know what time it is. So what time is it? How much time do I have? I'm good.
3:44.
3:45. So I am good. So I can answer any more questions or yeah. Go ahead.
How far away from the initial loss of contact is the wreck?
So the Anderson, who was following right behind the Fitzgerald, they were 10 miles behind her. They could not see the ship, but they could see her lights. and they had her on a radar. So 10 miles in a storm like that, that's forever. They took a heavy wave. They called it a freak wave. The Anderson did. When they came back up out of the water, there were no lights in front of them anymore. At that point, they looked the radar. They didn't see anything. They continued to call her on the radio, and there was no response. And then finally, Sault Ste. Marie's Coast Guard radio spoke up and asked the Anderson what was going on, and that's when the Anderson then said, "We think we lost the Edmund Fitzgerald," and they made the ship broadcast. What they would do is they would broadcast to all mariners that they believe a vessel has been lost, and to be on the lookout for survivors if you're in the area. There were 2 ships behind the Fitzgerald that once they got past where they believed the Fitzgerald was, they turned around and started to do searching, but it was really, really bad. So as they started to get damaged, they turned and ran to the bay to get out of that kind of water. So
she wasn't the only one.
She wasn't the only one. There was the motor vessel Anderson, and I don't remember the name of the other vessel because it was a foreign vessel. So foreign vessels come and go off the Great Lakes, usually just in the summertime. And this foreign vessel was making the last run to get out of the locks so they could get off the Great Lakes. That at a certain point they lock down the Great Lakes and you can't get out. I don't know if you heard that there's a Coast Guard vessel that was stuck in Cleveland because they had a strike, and they couldn't get to the Hudson River, so they were waiting until the strike was over. So, but that's go ahead.
So the Anderson had a freak wave that came over them.
Yes, the Anderson that would have already hit the Fitzgerald.
That was my
point.
question. It would have hit.
So that freak wave, which was over the bridge,
the
Anderson reported would have hit the Fitzgerald too.
But before it hit the Anderson.
Yes, before it hit the Anderson. So I don't know the difference between the Anderson. Maybe the wave lost some energy in that 10 miles that it was going. There are freakways all over the ocean that come, and you hear about them all the time. The Great Lakes don't have as many, but there are occasions for that to happen. So, yes, young man.
So, the second name of the ship that went to go search was the William Clay Ford.
So, thank you. The William Clay Ford was the second vessel then that went and also searched. So, go ahead.
Was your ship in the search and rescue first on the scene, and how many other
so that's a good question. So the Coast Guard had a vessel called the Coast Guard Catawba out of Sault Ste. Marie. She was a harbor tug. She was 110 feet long, and she tried to get out into Lake Superior, and she immediately lost her screw. She only had a single screw, so she had to be rescued. And the small motor lifeboats that we had at the time, they were 36 foot. You saw a couple pictures of the 36-foot boats. They were like what was used in the Finest Hour. However, they also had issues with those waves being that bad. So
we were
the first U.S. Coast Guard vessel there, and the Canadian Coast Guard also responded with a sister ship like ours. So.
Woodbrush was also commander.
For the entire. We didn't know at the time she was in Canadian waters. It's hard to tell until you can actually pinpoint the wreck. So, and even then, there's some people that say part of the wreck lies in the U.S., part of the wreck lies in Canadian waters. So, yeah.
What was the name of the shipping company that owned it?
Cleveland Cliffs, I believe. Don't hold me on that one. I'm not 100% sure now. It's probably in there. Either United States Steel or Cleveland Cliffs, probably. One of those two. She was named after a gentleman out of Milwaukee. Edmund Fitzgerald was named after Edmund Fitzgerald. And it's spelled E-D-M-U-N-D, not the other way around. So, I do have a lot of books here. One of the best books you can get is written by Bruce Lynn and Christopher Winters. It's got a lot of pictures, a lot of information. It talks about the crew a lot. Some of the books don't actually talk about the crew all that much. Another one that I'm partial to only because the author included me in it was this one that was written by Rick Mixter. It's called The Tattletale Sounds of the Edmund Fitzgerald. That just came out. He interviewed me for a podcast, and from that podcast he utilized some of that information in the book. So he mentioned me in a few spots. So.
Statement and a question.
Yes.
If what you can read on the internet can be believed, I was surprised recently to see how many of the 29 deceased had Ohio.
Yes, quite a few. In fact, there was a young man on board ship that graduated high school the same year I graduated high school. But I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, a lot of Bay Village, Lakewood.
Lots of down here because I think the home base for both of those ships was Ohio. So.
And my question is, almost 50 years later, the sinking still resonates with the books and the song.
So unlike all the other shipwrecks, everybody forgot about it 2 days or 3 days or a week after they actually happened. Unlike that, the Edmund Fitzgerald lives on because of Gordon Lightfoot. They believe that Gordon, who wrote the song, wanted people to remember this, and that sparked the interest in the Great Lakes. As a kid, I was really involved. I really loved anything that had to do with shipwrecks, and especially on the Great Lakes. That's probably what got me in the Coast Guard to begin with, because I was always very interested. If I could get my hands on something and read it, I did. So. But yeah, they actually say that Gordon had a lot to do with the families. Are so thankful.
Which leads to my question.
What did they do to memorialize him this year at the memorial?
So this year at the memorial, they actually honored Gordon Lightfoot because everybody knows he passed away this year. And the stories they told about Gordon and how he wrote the song and everything were talked about again. And everybody the families all just appreciated what he had done for them and helped them heal. So
did they ring the bell for him too?
Yes, part of so that when they rang the bell the 30th time, they did it for all the mariners and for Gordon. So
my question was that with your background and because it still resonates, surprised that they've never made a movie about it.
Probably because the families don't want to do it. In a lot of cases, it would be just a very sad. I mean, there's nothing special about the crew other than they were family members, their husbands, wives. Husbands and sons and things like that. And their backstories, there's not enough to fuel something like that. I mean, they've written a lot of books, and a few of them talk about the families and the crew, but to make a movie, I don't know. I know the families didn't seem like they would want to do something like that when asked. So in 2 years, this was the 48th year, so they're already planning the 50th, which they're not sure they're going to keep doing this forever. But obviously the Shipwreck Museum will do whatever the families want to do. If they want to keep going, they will keep going. So, any others? Yes.
Do we know what motivated Gordon Lightfoot to write the song?
He felt moved by the fact that a ship was lost, and nobody talked about it other than a few minutes on the national news that night. And there was nothing in any of the newspapers that he saw, and he just felt so moved by it, being from Canada and knowing that the Great Lakes. He was a sailor himself. He had his own boats, and he knows what it was like to be in some of those bad storms while sailing, and he just felt motivated to do it. He wasn't thinking that this would turn into what it turned into. So. I never got to meet him. I wish I could have. He was there on the 45th anniversary. He didn't actually play. But he met with the families and talked to them, and they exchanged information and stayed in touch with each other. So he was just very moved by it all. So
Did you say he took most of the lyrics out of a newspaper article?
yeah, it was either a Time or a Newsweek magazine at the time that had a story about it, because in most of the newspapers the stories ran, like the Cleveland Plain Dealer ran it because it was big news for a lot of people from Ohio passed away on the ship. So, but after that, there was not much in there. Every now and then you'd see something from the Coast Guard saying they have more information, they're still investigating. But other than that, everybody sort of forgot about it. The Carl D. Bradley, which sank in '66, I mean, how many people know about that? And everybody was lost but one person on that boat, and he just passed away. So, but you didn't hear anything about it because nobody wrote a song and talked about it. So, anybody else? Any other questions? If you know anybody that needs to join the service, not that I'm, but the Coast Guard is one hell of a service to join. A young man or a young lady couldn't do better because of what we do. We're now part of the Homeland Security, and so they do a lot of different things. The rescues, they do drug interventions, they do a whole bunch of stuff. And in time of war, we are part of the Navy, but thank goodness we haven't had a war for a while. So thank you very much for listening.